My name is Daniel. When I really think about it, my life in this city feels stagnant. The worn-out 18th century stone buildings, the empty streets, and the wind that's always cold in October. Our city is a place where old stories feel more alive than the present. Maybe that's why Leo, my best friend since we were in elementary school, and I are always looking for ways to break the boredom. We're two guys who are equally obsessed with metal music. The louder and more underground, the more we love it. And during those hours, we often feel the most alive. That night, it was well past 3 in the morning, and we had an idea that, to be honest, was a little stupid. We decided to walk around the city's very old cemetery. The cemetery is located behind the town square, divided in two by a main road. We chose the older section, which is separated from the modern part by an old iron fence and a rusty gate. The atmosphere there felt different. The gravestones were tilted, many of them covered in thick moss. We walked slowly, observing the carvings of names that were almost unreadable. Some of the tombstones were even broken, leaving nothing but shapeless piles of stone. I took a few photos with my old Polaroid camera, while Leo recorded the atmosphere on his phone. We were a little disrespectful, but we thought this was decades, even centuries ago. Who would care? After about an hour, we sat down under a massive, ancient frangipani tree. The air felt colder there, and the silence was piercing. There was only the sound of the wind rustling among the headstones. That's when I heard it. The laughter of a little girl. It was so clear, cheerful, and close. I immediately turned to Leo, and he looked at me with a startled expression. We both knew we weren't hallucinating. At first, I tried to think logically. Maybe it was a sound from someone's phone in a car on the main road, or maybe just a strange acoustic effect caused by the wind. We weren't easily scared, so we just looked at each other, chuckled a little, and said how creepy it was. We went back to talking, but this time the atmosphere wasn't the same. Then, I started to feel something strange. It felt like someone was watching me from a distance. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just my imagination, an effect of the eerie setting. But Leo then whispered, "Daniel, I think I see someone behind those bushes." He pointed to a small wooded area next to the cemetery. The distance wasn't very far, only about 20 meters. I looked over, and I swear, I saw a shadow moving among the trees. The shape was unclear, just a black silhouette shifting slowly. We both immediately got goosebumps. We decided to leave. As soon as we stood up, the laughter was heard again, this time louder and closer. It was followed by the sound of footsteps crunching on dry leaves. Our hearts pounded, and without thinking, we just ran. We had never run so fast. The sound of the footsteps seemed to follow us, getting faster as we ran. We sprinted down the hill, dodging the tilted headstones toward the gate, and finally reached our motorcycle parked at the side of the road, under a flickering street lamp. The noises behind us stopped the moment we reached the bike. I immediately started the engine. My hands were shaking, and I could feel Leo's breathless panting behind me. We sped off as fast as we could, not caring about the speed limit. We rode until we reached the only gas station open at that hour to make sure we were safe. That's when Leo turned around and his eyes widened. "Daniel, your backpack flap," he said with a trembling voice. I looked, and sure enough, the flap on my backpack was open. I don't remember opening it, and there was no reason to. We checked the backpack. The contents were still there, but some of the items were jumbled. I still don't know what happened that night. Were we just overreacting, or was there something real? All I know is, every time I tell this story, I still feel that strange sensation, the exact same feeling as when I felt someone behind me, whoever it was. One early spring afternoon, I sat in my office at the Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris. As an administrative staff member there, I was accustomed to the solemn silence. That afternoon, however, a young man named David came to see me. He was an artist of Italian descent with a soft but thick accent. He had come to arrange the funeral and choose a grave plot for his father, who was in the hospital. From his weary eyes emanated a profound sadness, but also an extraordinary serenity. He showed me some photos of his father, an old man with a warm smile and wrinkles around his eyes that seemed to tell a lifetime of stories. "My father was a sculptor," he said in a low voice. "He always loved beauty, even in death." We spent a long time talking. I showed him the map of the vast cemetery, with its winding paths and ancient tombs. David finally chose a plot that faced a quieter area, near famous graves that were hundreds of years old. As he left, I felt the burden he had left behind. A few days later, the sad news came. David's father had passed away. The funeral was held on a terrible day. The sky over Paris, usually so clear, was now gray. Thunder rumbled, and a heavy rain poured down without ceasing, as if the entire city was in mourning. As the funeral procession arrived at the main gate, I saw David in his car, behind the hearse. His stoic face now looked incredibly tired. We waved to each other, a simple gesture in the midst of the incessant rain, before I went back inside, preparing for my next task. I took one of the operational vehicles and followed the procession to the gravesite. My job was to ensure the entire process went smoothly. I stood under a large umbrella, watching as David and his family said their final goodbyes. After the ceremony was over and the mourners began to leave the area, I made my usual rounds, ensuring everything was secure. Piles of files on my desk were waiting to be finished, and I also had to make sure the cemetery was safely locked up in time. The time was 5:30 p.m., closing time. It was already dark, hastened by the thick storm clouds. After finishing the last of the files, I took the keys and made one more round of the area to ensure no visitors were left. That's when, on one of the gravestone paths, I saw something strange. A shadow, or maybe someone, was walking quickly before disappearing behind the fence surrounding a family tomb. I honked the horn, a habit to signal that the place would be closing soon. But strangely, the figure didn't reappear. Feeling worried, I took my umbrella and ran in the direction where the shadow had disappeared. I followed the fence and the seemingly endless rows of headstones, but found no one. I searched for 20 minutes in the rain, which by now had soaked my clothes. Finally, I gave up and returned to the office. Inside, I immediately checked the CCTV footage. There was nothing strange, although visibility was very poor due to the storm and the darkness that now completely enveloped the area. As I tried to focus on finishing some documents while watching the screen, I heard the front door of the reception room slam shut loudly. The sound startled me. I jumped from my chair and spontaneously shouted, "Is anyone there?" I stepped into the lobby, but no one was there. Silence. Maybe it was the wind, I thought, or maybe the figure I had seen earlier had already left. I began to check every window, and at one of them, I stopped. Outside, someone was standing, staring at me with a blank gaze. My heart pounded. I jumped back and screamed, but the figure didn't move. I moved closer, trying to look carefully, and a cold recognition crept up my spine. The face, although faint behind the raindrops, looked very similar to the photo of David's father he had shown me a few days ago. With an uncontrollable sense of panic, I ran outside, to the place where the figure had stood, but it was no longer there. There were no footprints on the wet lawn, no one hiding behind the bushes. It had simply vanished. I stood in the pouring rain, soaked and shivering. My mind was in chaos. I went back inside, hastily locked all the doors, got into my car, and drove home immediately. When I got home, my wife asked me why I was so pale and shaking. I just answered, "A long day at work." To this day, I try to convince myself that it was just a hallucination from exhaustion and stress. But every time I close my eyes, I can still see the blank stare of that familiar face, standing behind the rain, waiting to be seen. The incident continues to haunt my mind, a mystery I can never solve. When I was 18, that summer felt so long and boring. My days were spent playing video games and eating leftover food in the basement. Then my friend Jake, who was always looking for a challenge and could never stay still, came over to my house. We were hanging out in the basement when he noticed a soda bottle on the table. He picked it up, spun it in his hand, and his eyes suddenly lit up. "I heard a story about Pinewood Cemetery," he said in a whisper, as if it were the world's biggest secret. "Apparently, there's a disused area, and behind it, there's some kind of old abandoned shack." I knew about Pinewood Cemetery. It was an old burial ground on the outskirts of our town in Brunswick, New York. The front was well maintained, but in the back, there was an area surrounded by a tall, rusty iron fence covered in thick vines. Rumor had it that area hadn't been used since the 1930s. Wild bushes grew, almost completely obscuring the ancient gravestones. Many locals called it the Lost Area. Jake managed to convince me. The night felt perfect for our stupid adventure. The sky was thick with clouds, no stars were visible, and a cold chill started to prick, even though it was still summer. We parked the car a little way from the main gate, on a quiet side street. We walked along the long stretching fence until we found a broken section and easily slipped through. The atmosphere inside felt strange and silent. The air was colder and more humid than outside the fence. The sound of our footsteps on the dry grass and broken twigs was the only noise, and it felt so loud. I kept looking over my shoulder, checking the shadows created by the light from our phones. "This is really creepy," I whispered. "Yeah, I know," Jake replied, his eyes fixed straight ahead, looking a little tense. We walked between the tilted gravestones, many of them mossy and almost illegible. I could feel the coldness of the stones from a distance. When we reached the back, we saw the old shack he had talked about. The wooden building looked dilapidated, its windows broken and paint peeling. An empty aura surrounded the building, as if it was swallowing all the light around it. That's when I saw a movement in one of the second-story windows. For a moment, I saw the silhouette of a man standing there. He just stood still, watching us. I immediately grabbed Jake's arm. "There's someone inside," I whispered, my breath held. Jake looked at the window, and he saw it too. But instead of being scared, he was curious. He walked toward the weathered front door. "I'm going to see what's in there," he said, his voice trembling, but full of determination. "Don't," I pleaded. "This is weird, we have to go. This isn't normal." I stayed outside, while Jake pushed the creaky door open and disappeared into the darkness. I stood outside, my heart pounding. Time seemed to move so slowly. I kept calling Jake's name, but there was no answer. The silence was chilling. Suddenly, from inside the shack, there was a very loud crashing sound, followed by the sound of heavy, fast footsteps. The sound wasn't Jake's. I froze. My blood felt like ice. Suddenly, a hoarse, deep voice yelled from inside the shack, "Get out of here!" The voice was so angry and powerful, it made me tremble from head to toe. There was no time to think. I turned and ran as fast as I could. As I ran, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. It wasn't the sound of running. It was a rhythmic tread, like someone was leisurely chasing me. But each step felt like a hammer blow. I managed to jump out of the cemetery area. Jake was already in the car. His face was very pale. "Get in fast," he yelled. He immediately floored the gas, leaving the cemetery behind us. Gasping for breath, he told me what happened. He went inside and found a staircase leading to the basement. As he walked down, he saw an old man. The man stared at him with empty eyes and started walking toward him. The man didn't look crazy, just very angry. Jake panicked, dropped his flashlight, and ran out. Neither of us ever found out who that man was or why he was there. But one thing's for sure, that story became our most terrifying secret, and we never dared to go back to Pinewood Cemetery again. We both knew there was something there we shouldn't have disturbed, and the encounter wasn't just a hallucination. Whenever I pass that road, I can't help but look toward the tall iron fence, wondering if the old man is still standing there, watching. It has been 2 years since Grandma Eleanor passed away. Time has passed so quickly, feeling like both a blink of an eye and an eternity. My life has changed a lot. I moved to a smaller apartment, got a promotion at work, and even started taking yoga classes. However, one thing that has never changed is the memory of her. The memories are like a book I have never finished reading, and every time I open it, I find new details that make me miss her. My grandmother and I were very close. As her only granddaughter, I was her main companion. We spent a lot of time together at her house, especially on the back porch. It was there that we built our small world. We would sit for hours in the rocking chairs, sipping the jasmine tea she always brewed, and she would tell me stories about her youth in the countryside. The sound of her crisp laughter when I told a silly joke, or her warm hand holding mine, are details I still remember clearly. The house is now empty. My Uncle Marc takes care of it, but I have never had the courage to go inside again. There are too many memories there, too many things that remind me of the loss. That night in October, I was on my way home from the office. I passed the road that leads to my grandmother's house. It felt like an invisible hand was guiding my steering wheel. I decided to stop, even if only for a moment. I parked the car on the side of the road and looked at the old house. The dark, dull windows were like empty eyes staring back. An unbearable sense of longing took over me. I remembered the smell of the ginger cookies she always made, the sound of a spoon clinking against a porcelain cup, and her laughter. As I sat in the car, lost in nostalgia, my phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. The message read, "When are you coming home, honey?" My heart pounded. That was the message my grandmother always sent me whenever I spent the night at her house. Her hand would type that message, and then she would stand at the door, waiting for me. A chill ran through me, but strangely, there was also a confusing sense of longing. I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence. Maybe a friend had sent it to the wrong person. I decided to go home right away. But the thought of my grandmother's house and the mysterious message kept haunting me. When I got to my apartment, I went straight to sleep. However, around 3 a.m., I woke up. I felt that something was different in my room. A familiar aura, like the scent of jasmine tea and lavender. I turned on the light, and my gaze fell upon an old photo on the nightstand. The photo was of me and my grandmother, sitting on the back porch of her house. An old recipe book of hers was lying next to the photo. I picked it up, opened it, and on the first page, I saw a note in her handwriting. "For my puput, the secret ginger cookie recipe will always be waiting for you to come back." The handwriting was identical to the one in the message. I didn't know what to think. Was this a sign? Was my grandmother trying to communicate with me? I felt scared, but also strangely, I felt a little peaceful. It felt like, even though she was gone, a part of her was still there to remind me of the beautiful memories we had. That morning, I called my uncle. "Uncle, did you have a chance to clean the table on the back porch of Grandma's house?" "No, dear. I just cleaned the yard." "Why?" "Nothing. Nothing at all, I replied. I was just wondering. I knew, even though she couldn't trace the number, and even though no one could explain what I was feeling, I knew that message, that whisper, it was not just a coincidence. It was a sign from my grandmother. It was her way of saying, I'm here, and I will always be waiting for you to come home. I will never be able to forget that night. The night I dared to reopen the memories I had been avoiding, and found that love never truly dies